Welcome. It is my honor and privilege today to welcome you to La Cucina Cooking School. My name is Joseph Duggan. I am a chef, and I am here today because of my grandmother, Carmel de la Peña. She was a special lady and a special person in my life and in many other people's lives, as she was a fine artist and an art teacher for both children and adults. Beyond that, she also was in the culinary world for many years. She ran the La Cucina Cooking School from the late 70s into the mid 80s, as well as being a caterer, cookbook author. She filmed 4 cooking programs, one episode which still survives to this day, authored a cookbook with plans to author other cookbooks, had a plan to open up a restaurant, which we still have the recipes and her business plan. She was a food consultant. She tested many recipes, cooking and baking alike, cooking for all the family gatherings, holidays, and special occasions. They were all special times. In her cooking school, she taught adults out of her home how to cook beautiful and wonderful food. She taught both cooking and baking, whether it was fancy European cakes and different pastries, to Spanish tapas, to paella, to all different kinds of stuff. Her cooking classes were hands-on. Everybody got involved and they all sat down and ate the lunch together that they had all prepared. On this cooking series, we are going to travel through into my grandmother's kitchen. We are going to experience her recipes and her food. We're going to look at tips, techniques, little secrets. We're going to go through lots of memories together as we travel through her food and look at a special lady and her imprint on the culinary world. Welcome. Let's get cooking. Welcome everybody to La Cucina Cooking School. My name is Joseph Duggan. This is our inaugural first episode in this cooking series. And today I have chosen a particularly wonderful recipe, perfect for this time of year. And for myself and my grandmother, this was one of our absolute favorite recipes. And we used to prepare it together every week of Thanksgiving. What we are going to be making today is chestnut dressing. First thing we have to talk about is dressing versus stuffing. Stuffing refers to our bread-laden mixture being stuffed inside a turkey, inside your bird, and then roasting from there. Dressing refers to the same bread-laden mixture being cooked in a baking pan, casserole dish, or roasting pan in the oven separate from the turkey. And cooking this, today we're going to be making a dressing. We're not going to be making a stuffing. The problem with this being used as a stuffing is that it contains eggs. And when it's stuffed into a turkey, what happens is when the turkey becomes perfectly cooked at 165 degrees for your breast and 170 to 175 for your legs and your dark meat. The turkey is perfectly cooked, but you can't guarantee that the stuffing has cooked to 165 degrees. Because this mixture has to be cooked to 165 degrees for it to be safe. And so if it's not cooked all the way, your stuffing, then your turkey will technically have to be overcooked. That is why my grandmother always made this as dressing and not stuffing. We're going to talk about our ingredients today. First of all, being that it is chestnut dressing, I have 1 jar of cooked chestnuts. To augment the chestnuts, we also have a 1/2 cup of pinoli nuts that have been toasted in a skillet. And being a stuffing, it is laden with bread. And our first bread we're going to be using is a French bread. This is a supermarket loaf of French bread. Go to any supermarket that has French bread. And you want to get one, you want to buy your French bread 2 days in advance. It comes in the bread bag with a little cover to cover the exposed end. Just put this in your refrigerator and it will stay alive. You do not want to seal this up in a plastic bag because you don't want this bread to be fresh. And what we are going to do with this bread is we're going to cut this bread in half, like so, with a serrated knife. Then I'm going to cut the 2 halves in half long ways like you would for a submarine sandwich. Then we will cut that bread into those halves into strips and we will dice the bread. And that will be a dice of bread which we are going to toast and dry out in a 375 degree oven. I'm not going to show that task here, but that's the first task that has to happen. Just take this bread and it needs to be diced and dried out on a sheet pan in a 375 degree oven. Takes about 15 minutes in the oven to dry it out. Along with that, we're going to be using boxed cornbread stuffing. This is a seasoned cornbread stuffing, and that is important because it contributes to the flavor. If you don't like cornbread stuffing, you could use regular stuffing. But make sure you don't buy the cube stuffing, just buy the stuffing that's not cube, because we have the bread cubes. Now, to start our stuffing, we have here Italian sweet sausages, also known as mild sausages. Do not use the hot sausages. They will completely change the flavor of this recipe. And I have 5 links of sausage here. My grandmother always chose to use links over bulk sausage. And to take the meat out, just take your knife, a sharp point of a boning knife or a paring knife, and you just cut it, slit it down the middle, and then with your fingers you can pull out the meat. And I will show you what that looks like when we're at the stove. We have aromatics to deal with, which we have onions. My grandmother always uses a sweet onion in this recipe. This onion wasn't big enough, so I'm going to use half of this other onion just to add a little more onion to it. And this is just a labeled sweet onion. You could buy brand name like Vidalia, Walla Walla, or Maui onions, or Texas sweets, but make sure it's a sweet onion. You hardly cry when you cut these. We're also going to put some garlic, and because it's dressing, Granny Smith apples. 2 of them. We're also going to use 4 cloves of garlic and 3 ribs of celery. For flavoring, what I have here is Amontillado sherry and extra dry vermouth. And for our herbs, which is very important in this, Our main herb is going to be a half a bunch of chopped fresh sage. Our secondary herb is going to be some fresh thyme, also half a bunch of thyme leaves that have been stripped and chopped. We're also going to use a teaspoon of dried basil for a little extra flavor, and then a whole bunch of flat leaf Italian parsley chopped. I'm also going to put in some fresh nutmeg, salt, and pepper. We're going to be very careful about the salt because we are using sausage, and we are using the seasoned stuffing as well as chicken broth. And the chicken broth we're using is store-bought box chicken broth. That's important because it is well seasoned, and that's important for our recipe. I have eggs, which are going to provide moisture as part of our science of dressing, because what we need is moisture from chicken broth, moisture and binding power from our eggs, and moisture from butter. And I have a lot of butter sitting out here. 3/4 of a pound of our butter is going to be melted and used as our liquid mixture, while this 1/4 of a pound of butter is going to be used to cook our vegetable mixture, and this 2 ounces of butter is going to be used to grease our pans that we're going to bake our stuffing in. You could use a spray, but you're using butter anyways. It's just going to give a better flavor. And those are our beautiful ingredients. And when we come back, we're going to be at the stove, and I'm going to show you how to prepare this recipe. It's very easy to cook. There are a number of ingredients, but it's not difficult. It's not a difficult recipe. The thing you're not going to see is the preparation of this loaf of bread. Like I said, just cut it in half to make 2 pieces. Cut the halves in half long ways. Cut them into strips, dice, and then they go into a 375-degree preheated oven for about 15 minutes, if not 20 minutes, which toasts and dries out the bread. When we come back, we will be at the stove. Welcome back to La Cucina Cooking School and Carmel's chestnut dressing. First thing I have done here is I have melted our 3/4 of a pound of butter in the back there. It's already melted and ready to go. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to turn both the front burner on this side and the front burner on this side on high. I'm using on this side a normal saute pan. On this side it's a deeper saute pan because this needs to be deep enough to hold all the ingredients once we're done here. And we're going to start our sausage with 2 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil. That's fine. And for the other pot, we're going to put in our last 1/4 of butter. And we're going to turn this one down because we don't want the butter to burn. We want it to get fully melted but not burned. Because you don't want to burn your butter. It will change the flavor. If the butter goes brown, the flavor changes. And we won't want any browning involved here. And these are the sausages. I took a knife and slit the casing down along the middle, and the meat just pops right out. If it doesn't pop right out, you can give it a little helping hand with the spoon. And now that our oil is shimmering, we can start the sausage. Just going to slide it right in. You'll hear a beginning of a sizzle. Now we'll pull up our vegetables here. And just let the sausage cook. Break it up as it cooks. butter is almost all melted, and then we will add our lovely, once our butter is melted, we will then add our lovely vegetables. Slide our vegetables into the other pot here. There we go. That's all of our vegetables in the other pot. Now I can turn the heat up a little bit now on our vegetables. And then break up the sausage as it's cooking. You want to get some nice color on this sausage. And the reason why we're doing these in separate pots is because we don't want that sausage to become way too overcooked by the time it goes in the oven. We were to start this recipe with the sausage first and then cook our vegetables. The sausage would get way too cooked before the recipe was even finished. So don't worry about the fond on the bottom. We want that. That's all good flavor. And you want to just keep breaking it up. Now right now into our vegetables, we're going to add some salt and some pepper at this point. You don't need to add too much salt because we are dealing with a lot of seasoned ingredients, and we're going to add some pepper now. Freshly ground pepper always. We'll come back when this sausage is done cooking. We'll be back when this sausage is done cooking. See you in a few minutes. Bring it all the way down. We need to fix this problem now. I'll tell you what, this tape here. Welcome back. Our sausage is almost all the way cooked, as you can see here. And I have it turned down here. I'm going to turn it back up again so we can get some lovely flavor here out of it. Vegetables are getting nice and tender. I'm going to turn the vegetables back up. Okay. Just make sure to break it into little pieces. It doesn't need to be fully broken down because you want chunks of sausage in the stuffing, but you don't want large pieces. You don't want ultra large pieces. And as you can see, we have that nice fond on the bottom. We're going to use our extra dry vermouth to deglaze this pan. Get the last little bit cooked here. There's some little raw bits here. Now we're going to put a half of a cup of our extra dry vermouth. And vermouth has a better flavor than, let's say, ordinary white wine. That's why we use vermouth here in this recipe. Now we're going to let this cook, and we're going to scrape all the goodness off the bottom. And then we're going to shut it off. This mixture is done and ready to go. We'll leave that to the side. And now we'll continue with this. There's a lot of moisture in all of these vegetables, so you really need to cook it out. But we don't want any color on our vegetables, so that's why we are being careful. Next ingredient we're going to add here is our chopped garlic. We're also going to put in a teaspoon of paprika, Hungarian sweet paprika. That's one ingredient I forgot to mention at the beginning. And you don't want to put the garlic in at the beginning. You want to put it in at this stage because you want the garlic you don't want the garlic to burn. So. That was one of my skillets making a run for it. The handle wasn't on fully, so it just slipped right out of the handle and fell. There's always real life things that happen, so everything's nice and concentrated in our sausage mixture. And I'm starting to see less water in our vegetables. Which at this time we're going to add our thyme and our sage that I have chopped up here. And our parsley. Everything is stir. And our sausage mixture. Scrape all the goodness in there. It smells wonderful. Just going to reach one of my tools here. Get everything out of the pan. You want all the goodness in there, so there we go. This is going to cook another 5 minutes. Along with our chestnuts, our pine nuts, and some freshly grated nutmeg. Make sure it's freshly grated. Cool, that'll be enough. Now I'm going to grind in a little more pepper. That'll be fine. That's what we like to see. All the liquid has been absorbed and cooked out. Okay. Now we're going to close our fire here. And we're going to add one final ingredient as we close the fire. And that is a half cup of Amontillado sherry. We're going to add it at this point because we don't really need to cook all of the alcohol off. It's going to preserve some of its delicious flavor. That's our sherry. And now we're just going to let this mixture cool down a little bit before we put it into with our bread and our other ingredients. And when we come back, we will be at this table and I will show you how to mix the stuffing. Welcome back to La Cucina Cooking School and Carmel's chestnut dressing. These are the pans that I have prepared. They have been rubbed with 2 ounces of butter. This is the first pan. If we need the second pan, we may not need the second pan because we may be able to fit it all in one pan. If we need the second pan, here it is. I have my melted butter from before. I have my quart of chicken broth. I also have extra chicken broth if necessary. We have extra broth. I also have my salt and pepper for tasting. We have our mixture from earlier. And I have 5 eggs, which I'm going to beat like so until they're fully homogenized. You don't want any streaks of white. Just like what you would do for an omelet or scrambled eggs. Okay, that. Now, this is our bread cubes that have been cooled to room temperature. Along with our bread cubes, we're going to add 1 bag and 2 bags of our cornbread dressing or stuffing from the box. Using a large spoon, I'm going to give it a mix. This is what I use to mix it in. You could use a gigantic bowl, even a large pot, but this holds everything. That's why I like it. Next we're going to add is our mixture. I'm going to scrape it all in. It's still warm, but it'll work because we're going to be stirring it directly into the bread and it'll start to cool off. Get it all scraped down. Make sure you get all the goodness out of the pan. Okay. Fine. And now we're going to give this, start to mix it. We're going to get everything evenly distributed before we start adding our liquid in here. I am going to, being a chef, I'm going to taste this once it's all mixed up with all of our liquid ingredients. I'm going to taste it just like it is. But if you're worried about tasting, eating raw eggs, what you're going to do is take a little bit, about 2 ounces worth, and make a little patty and saute it like you would a sausage patty in a small nonstick skillet with a few drops of vegetable oil. But I have no problems tasting it as it is. Now what we have to do is we have to introduce our beaten eggs, our melted butter, and our chicken broth. This is the trio, which is the science of dressing. We want to get medium damp, and we're actually going to use our hands to feel for that texture. We're going to incorporate this little bit of egg, little butter, a little broth. Going to incorporate it so that all of the butter and all of the eggs are incorporated, but not all of the broth. We can hold back on the broth. And then when we think we've got to a good texture, that's when I'm going to taste it for seasoning. If we need to add any more salt or pepper, we will do that at this point. And then we will pan it up in our pans. So we're going to start with a little bit of our eggs. And butter and some of our chicken broth. You want to be very careful you don't put too much chicken broth in here at a time when you're mixing the ingredients together. And you want to get it well mixed between each addition so that there isn't a clump of egg or a clump of or a pool of melted butter in the bottom. You just want to get it well mixed. And you will see it after you put the first addition of liquid ingredients, it comes together. Next, more egg. So it's about 1/3 of egg per addition. More butter, and the same with the butter. The broth, it's like 1/4, because you don't want to overdo the broth because you don't want to get it too wet. And we have extra broth because tomorrow when we pull these out, we're going to look at the texture. And if we need to put any more liquid in there at that point, we can then add more liquid. Okay. Now we'll put in the rest of our eggs. I'm just going to use the scraper here to get it all in. And the rest of the butter. It's important here to use melted butter and not clarified butter. Melted butter has the milk solid, so it has more flavor. So it goes out of the way. And a little more broth. And I've still got 1/4 of my broth left over, which is important. Because I'm looking at this and it looks pretty good. Okay, I'm going to check the texture. I'm going to put a little more broth in here. If you don't want to touch it with your hands, you can wear a pair of disposable latex food service gloves. Would be perfectly fine. Now I'm looking at this and it holds together nicely. I'm going to say that's done for me, and we're going to now taste this. It needs just a little salt. And then I'm going to wash my hands at the sink so I can put some pepper in there. Just going to add a little pepper to this. And then we'll be able to pan it up. I have the pepper mill here. Always grind your pepper fresh. That's enough. And one final mix here. I will save the rest of that broth plus my other container of broth for tomorrow, in which we will we're going to use it tomorrow to, when we look at our dressings tomorrow, we'll be able to check for doneness, for the texture, and if we need to add any more broth, we can. Get everything out of the way. Now I'm going to pull up my pans here. 1 and 2. We're going to divide this evenly between them both. And Me and my grandmother used to do this back in the day. She had a gigantic plastic catering bowl. It was like this big and wide, and we would put it in there and we would mix it in. Then when my sister broke that bowl, because she borrowed it to use it for some function in high school, we had to end up using this green bowl, which wasn't as big as it should be, so it wasn't as big as the other bowl, so you could barely fit anything in there. That's why I like this container. It's good, useful for a lot of things. You need to make big batches of sangria. Mixing up the Christmas eggnog, I'll probably make that in here as well. So I'm going to hold back here. I'm going to start evening this out in the pans. And then we can adjust consistency here. We'll go back with some more mixture here. Go ahead and scrape the rest. I like this gigantic wood spoon for this process in mixing it because it's sturdy and can handle everything. Now we're going to use our silicone spatula to get the rest of it out. You could also, if you wanted, put them onto a scale and weigh it out if you really wanted to be exact about it. And if you're making a half batch of this, you could bake it in you can always bake it in a smaller dish if you're going to just make a half batch. You could even bake this all in one dish, but it would be really tall. And I like this, it's going to get more crusty baked in 2 pans here. Slide all of this out of the way here. And this is our chestnut dressing. We will come back on Thanksgiving Thursday to show you how to bake this and what it looks like when it's done. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to cover this with aluminum foil and or plastic wrap, whatever you have more of. It doesn't really matter. When we bake it in the oven, we're going to leave aluminum foil covered. So I'll probably just cover this with aluminum foil. And then once it's covered, and I'm going to put a double thickness of aluminum foil because my aluminum foil is thin, so we'll use a double thickness. And just store it in the refrigerator, and then tomorrow we're going to come back here. And I will see you back here, and I will show you how to bake this. It's fairly easy to bake, so we'll see you on Thanksgiving Thursday. Welcome back to La Cucina Cooking School. I'm Joseph Duggan, and here we are with Carmel's chestnut dressing that we started yesterday. Today it is Thanksgiving Thursday, and I'm going to open these up. And I am feeling them, and it needs more broth. It's very absorbed lots of the liquid. So I'm going to pour some liquid over the top of these because it really needs more liquid. This is cold right out of the refrigerator. So we're going to pop it right in the oven. Now I'm going to close it back down with the same foil. And I'll slide over the other one. Open it up. Then we're going to put the rest of this broth on this one. That's it. Okay. I have preheated the oven to 375 degrees. And if you're cooking this dressing mixture on the day that you make the mixture, just leave the oven on after you've dealt with your toasting of your bread. I'm going to place the pans in here. One on the bottom and then one on the top. Halfway through the baking process, we are going to reverse these in the oven. I'm going to cook this, being that this is right out of the refrigerator, I'm going to add an extra 10 minutes to the cook time. We're going to go 40 minutes in the oven. 35, 40 minutes. We will check it at 35 minutes. But at 20 minutes, I'm going to switch the pans, reverse them in the oven. So at 35 minutes, we're going to check back on our dressing. Welcome back to La Cucina Cooking School and my grandmother's chestnut dressing. I'm going to pull it out of the oven now. It's been about 35 minutes. It smells delicious. And I've got my thermometer ready to go. We're going to check the thermometer on this. We just need to check one of them. If it reaches 165 degrees, then we can guarantee that we are safe. If it's not 165 degrees, then it's going to have to go back into the oven. We will turn it on. Cool. This stuffing is now hot, as you can see here. I'm going to pull one of the covers off and show it to you. This is what it looks like right now. It's perfect. What we are going to do before I serve this is we're going to place this under a hot broiler to brown the top. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to turn my oven off, and then I'm going to turn on the broiler, and I'm going to place this under the broiler. Set the broiler to high, and we're going to heat the broiler. We're going to heat up our broiler, and we're going to use it to broil the tops of these. And that's going to give us a little bit of crustiness on the top. Once we have crusted over the top, I'm then going to rewrap it in aluminum foil and keep it hot. You can always flash it under the broiler to re-crisp the top when need be. We might have to do these pans separately, but we will check that. So I'm going to slide the pans in here, and we'll see if we can fit both. Probably not, but we might be able to do it. Yeah, just barely. Okay. Now I've slid them under the broiler. And we're going to start with a 2-minute timer. It's very important to go in small increments when you're working with the broiler and everything close to the broiler element. If you just walk away and forget about it, then the top will burn. If that happens, you might be able to scrape the burnt bits off, because it's probably not going to penetrate the bottom. But it's best just to watch it, because if you're not careful and you burn the top, that's just all your hard work down the drain. I just want to be very mindful of what you have cooking and make sure you have timers. And I'm going to show you mine. I like this. It's got 3 timers on it that you can set independently, as well as a clock that tells me what time it is. I also have a second one of these, and if I need be, I could put batteries in it and have a second timer so I could have 6 things going at one time if I had to. But I like this. A multi-timer is ideal. I also have the timer here on the stove that I'm using right now to check and I just looked at it, and I'm actually going to put it 2 more minutes, and that probably will be enough time to have crusted the top. You just have to keep an eye on it. Don't rely just on the timer that you've set. Rely on your nose and looking at it, because I can see it getting nicely browned in there. So it's important that you're careful. When you let things carefully, you just do things carefully. It's almost there. This stuffing is great stuff. This dressing, is great stuff. This is one of the best Thanksgiving aromas that comes out of the kitchen. When you're preparing it the day before and making the dressing mixture, and when you're baking it in the oven, it's one of the most familiar smells. And it's just lovely, and I can't wait to dig in, and it's a classic in our family. I can't remember a Thanksgiving when we didn't have chestnut dressing like this. And often it was made by my grandmother. In later years, both me and my grandmother made it together. We're going to cut this stuff out. Ooh. Got 20 seconds left on our second 2-minute timer. And we're going to pull this dressing out of the oven. Be very mindful when you're doing this to watch it like a hawk. Don't walk away from it and think that you can walk away and just leave it be. If it's baking, that's one thing, but being under a broiler, that's the other. So now we're going to cook this. And this is what we like to see. Some brown and crusty bits on the top. That is perfect. It's beautiful and lovely. We're going to let this cool just a little bit before we wrap it up back in tin foil, so it can be travel to its ultimate destination. So just be mindful that it is very hot, and when you transport this, it should sit flat in a trunk. And the best thing to do is to put heat trivets underneath, or even an old towel will do, as well as an old towel, just to protect this wherever it's going to sit, the floor where it's going to sit. So we're going to leave these be, and before serving this, I will snap a picture of it. Before serving, we will get one last look at this beautiful stuffing when it's on the Thanksgiving buffet. And I will probably end up parking one of these back under the broiler for just a couple of minutes, just to get the top a little bit more browned right before serving. And this is Joseph Duggan, and I hope you've enjoyed our look into my grandmother's chestnut dressing. And I look forward to meeting you here again with another one of Carmel Folia de la Peña's recipes. On our next episode, we're going to tackle a restaurant recipe. We're going to take a restaurant recipe from my grandmother's proposed restaurant. And we'll be looking at that next time. So until then, Enjoy.